June 6, 1944. Just after midnight, along the cold coastline of Normandy, German soldiers waited inside reinforced bunkers that were believed to be part of an unbreakable defense known as the Atlantic Wall, a massive system stretching across Europe and designed to crush any invasion before it could even begin. Among those soldiers were young men who carried not only weapons but also confidence built on propaganda, orders, and the belief that the enemy would never be able to breach their defenses. The beaches had been transformed into killing zones filled with mines, steel obstacles, machine gun nests, artillery positions, and overlapping fields of fire, calculated to destroy any force attempting to land. German commanders were certain that if the Allies came, they would be thrown back into the sea within hours. And this belief was reinforced by recent inspections, careful planning, and the sheer scale of their defensive preparations. However, what they did not realize was that the foundation of their confidence was already beginning to collapse, long before the first shot was fired. The weather in early June had turned violent, with strong winds, high waves, and low clouds covering the skies. And German meteorologists confidently reported that such conditions made any invasion impossible for at least 2 weeks. This assessment led to a critical mistake, as many high-ranking officers left their positions. Naval patrols were reduced, and overall readiness quietly relaxed, creating a gap between expectation and reality that would soon prove disastrous. Unknown to the Germans, the Allies had access to better weather intelligence and had identified a short break in the storm, a narrow window of opportunity that would allow them to launch the largest amphibious invasion in history. And while German command believed nothing would happen, the invasion force was already moving across the channel under the cover of darkness. As the night progressed, German radar stations began detecting unusual aerial activity, but at first these signals were dismissed as routine deception operations, something the Allies had used before to confuse and exhaust German defenses. However, the situation quickly escalated as reports started flooding in from multiple locations describing paratroopers landing across Normandy, and the confusion deepened as these reports contradicted each other, with some units claiming British forces, others reporting American troops, and many unable to determine exact positions. The chaos was intensified by the use of dummy paratroopers equipped with explosives, designed specifically to mislead and disrupt German responses, and as a result, German units hesitated, unsure of where the real attack was taking place. Some commanders recognized the danger immediately and requested permission to move their armored divisions to counter the threat. But strict command structures delayed any decisive action, forcing units to wait for confirmation while precious time slipped away. This hesitation would become one of the most critical failures of the entire defense, as the airborne forces were not just random attacks, but carefully planned operations to secure key positions and prepare the battlefield for the main invasion. By the time German command began to understand the scale of what was happening, the situation had already shifted beyond their control. As dawn approached, the fog over the English Channel began to lift, revealing a sight that many German soldiers would later describe as unimaginable. The horizon, which had been empty just hours before, was now filled with ships stretching as far as the eye could see, an endless armada composed of thousands of vessels, including warships, landing craft, and transport ships, forming the largest naval invasion force ever assembled. For soldiers who had been told that the enemy was weak and divided, this moment was psychologically devastating, as it shattered the illusion of control and replaced it with a growing sense of dread. Before they could fully process what they were witnessing, the bombardment began, and the calm of the morning was replaced by overwhelming violence as naval guns opened fire with devastating force. Massive shells slammed into German positions, shaking bunkers, tearing apart defensive structures, and burying soldiers under collapsing concrete. And even the strongest fortifications designed to withstand heavy attacks began to crack under the intensity of the bombardment, the psychological impact was as severe as the physical destruction, as soldiers realized that the defenses they trusted were not invincible, and that the enemy they were facing possessed a level of firepower they had never experienced before. At the same time, the expected support from the German Air Force failed to materialize. And despite promises of air superiority, only a handful of aircraft appeared, completely overwhelmed by the massive number of Allied planes dominating the skies. This absence of support further weakened morale, reinforcing the feeling that the defenders had been left alone against an unstoppable force. When the first wave of Allied troops reached the beaches, German machine guns opened fire, and the initial moments of the landing were brutal, with many soldiers cut down as they exited their landing craft, turning the shoreline into a scene of chaos and destruction. For a brief period, it seemed as though the defensive plans might succeed, as the intensity of German fire inflicted heavy losses on the advancing troops. However, this moment of hope quickly faded, as more and more Allied forces continued to arrive, and no matter how many were stopped, new waves kept coming, replacing losses instantly and maintaining constant pressure on the defenses. German soldiers began to experience a form of shock, as they realized that they were not facing a limited assault, but an overwhelming force that could not be stopped through conventional means. As the battle continued, another critical problem emerged. Ammunition shortages began to affect German positions, as the defensive calculations had been based on repelling a smaller attack, not sustaining continuous combat against an enemy of this scale. Machine guns overheated, artillery fire slowed down, and supplies ran dangerously low, while on the other side, Allied forces continued to deliver fresh troops, equipment, and resources without interruption, creating a growing imbalance that became impossible to ignore. Communication systems also began to fail, with telephone lines destroyed, radio signals disrupted, and units becoming isolated from one another, forcing individual commanders to make decisions without coordination or support. This breakdown in command and control further weakened the defense, as the organized structure that had been carefully planned collapsed under the pressure of the invasion. Meanwhile, German armored divisions, which had been intended as the decisive force to push the enemy back into the sea, were delayed by command restrictions and logistical challenges, and when they finally moved, they encountered relentless air attacks that destroyed vehicles, blocked roads, and slowed their advance to a crawl.
Close the gap. Keep moving. We need to clear this intersection now.
Even when some units managed to reach the battlefield, they faced new types of Allied equipment that they were not prepared to counter, including specialized tanks designed to overcome obstacles and defensive positions, further reducing the effectiveness of German resistance. As night fell, the situation did not improve, and attempts to regroup and counterattack were met with devastating accuracy from Allied forces, as every movement was detected, illuminated, and targeted with precision fire, making it nearly impossible to maneuver without suffering heavy losses. Soldiers described the battlefield as being constantly lit by flares, turning night into day and removing any advantage of darkness. Over time, the realization began to spread among German troops that the battle was no longer winnable, not because they lacked courage or training, but because they were facing an enemy with overwhelming industrial power, capable of replacing losses faster than they could inflict them. This was not just a military engagement, but a demonstration of a new kind of warfare, one driven by production, logistics, and sheer scale. As days passed, German units continued to weaken, suffering losses in men, equipment, and morale, while Allied forces grew stronger with each passing hour, securing their positions and expanding their control inland. Entire German formations collapsed. Elite units were reduced to ineffective remnants, and even experienced commanders acknowledged that the situation had become hopeless. By the end of the Normandy campaign, the outcome was undeniable, as German forces had suffered massive casualties, lost the majority of their equipment, and failed to stop the Allied advance, marking a turning point in the war that could not be reversed. For the soldiers who experienced it, D-Day was more than just a battle. It was a moment of realization, a confrontation with a reality that shattered everything they had been taught about warfare and victory. They had entered the battle believing in strength, preparation, and superiority. But what they encountered was something entirely different. A system of war powered by industry, coordination, and endless supply. In the end, the lesson of Normandy was clear. Modern war was no longer decided by bravery alone, but by the ability to sustain and overwhelm. And against such a force, even the strongest defenses could not hold. The German soldiers who survived did not just witness a defeat, they witnessed the future of warfare, and it was a future that they could not stop.